Today is Monday, January 6th, 2025. This is Bryan Gable and Joey Reynolds interviewing Richard Prince at the National Corvette Museum. Richard has worked directly with General Motors for the last 25 years as an official photographer for Corvettes, Corvette racing, has a great affinity for Corvettes, has a background with restoring Corvettes, and was inducted into the Corvette Hall of Fame in 2024. And we're here talking with Richard today in the process of creating a new exhibit called Speed Captured, which is going to feature all of Richard's photography, motorsports photography, studio photography, and as an important component of this exhibit, we're hoping to get his perspective on his career in photography and how he's able to capture these wonderful images that we're going to have on display. Richard, if we could start, could you please start by giving us your full name and spelling that out?
Yes, certainly. It's Richard Prince, Richard Prince.
Thank you. So let's start with how your professional photography career began. Can you tell us about what kind of training you had and how you got started as a photographer?
Yes, certainly. I actually got started as a photographer initially as an outgrowth of my writing. So I began writing a column for a Corvette magazine called Vet in, I believe it was late 1991 when I had a somewhat chance encounter with the editor of Vet magazine. My wife had written a letter to the editor, and he had some questions about her letter, so he called to speak with her. And at the time, my wife and I were in the Corvette restoration business, so the editor called our business, and after he asked her the question that he had, he asked what is Real Cars was the name of the business. So he said, "What's Real Cars?" And she explained it's a restoration shop. And he happened to be looking at that moment for somebody with a lot of hands-on experience who could also write about the cars, to write a column for the magazine. And he asked her if she might be interested. And she said, absolutely not, but maybe my husband would be. He enjoys writing and he's a good writer. So she put me on the phone, and in a 60-second phone call, I agreed to write a column for the magazine with one caveat. I said, Randy Riggs was the editor. I said, I'll give it a try, but if I don't want to continue, or if you don't like what I send you and you don't want me to continue, we can go our separate ways and still be friends. And he said, sure. So that's really how I began. I began writing that column, and the column, I believe the first one was published in the March 1992 issue of that. And that column did not require photography. So it was just writing, but I enjoyed it very much. He liked what I wrote, so that became a regular column for many years thereafter. And the column quickly led to requests for me to write other things, feature articles, technical articles, and everything else required photography. And initially I wasn't doing that. Somebody else was assigned to do the photography, and there were a lot of disappointments in that regard. A significant portion of the time, the photographer didn't even show up. And even when the photographer did show up, there was a problem half the time. The biggest problems were the lab ruined the film, the light wasn't right, the location wasn't right, and I was not a photography expert. We did a lot of photography because every large restoration project we did got photo documented. So we were shooting 12, 15, 20 rolls of film a week, and I never had a lab ruin my film. And yet I was assigned to write a feature article about a vintage Corvette, and half the time the lab was ruining the film. And I said, something's wrong here. And yeah, the light's no good. Why is the light no good? Well, it's the middle of the day. You chose the time of day. The location's no good. You chose the location. So I quickly concluded that I either had to do the photography myself or move on and just not do these articles, because At the time, my wife and I were still operating the restoration business, and it was a busy business. We had between 10 and 15 employees and a lot of responsibilities, and that was how I made my living. So the writing was really purely for enjoyment, and when the photographer blew it, it took the fun out of it. So I concluded, as I said, that I had to either do the photography myself or just not do the articles, and decided to try the photography myself, and that's how I became a photographer. So I had no formal training. I just kind of dove in and got my lumps and made my mistakes early on and learned quickly. And I did have the benefit of some good advice from experienced photographers like Randy Riggs at Vet Magazine. He was patient with me, and I quickly figured it out, and it kept going.
So you were talking about how the photography that was accompanying your articles, there were things that were under the photographer's control that weren't up to standard, like the lighting and the location. Were there other factors that you were looking for better photography that you looked at the photos and say, oh, I can do that better myself? Other things besides like the location and the lighting, or what else did you think was lacking?
Well, I didn't have any, as far as the photography that was being done by others to accompany my articles. This was in the very beginning of my writing career, and they were all experienced photographers, and I didn't have a critical eye at that point to say, oh, I'd have done this differently or I'd have done that differently. It was really the basics, like just not showing up, or showing up and then there are no photos. And without the photography, there was no article. So I was wasting my time interviewing the owner of the car or the subject matter of the article, and then no photography, no article. And it's contrary to my nature to waste time. I try to be as efficient as possible in everything that I do, and I intuitively came to the conclusion a long time ago, very early in life, that time is the single most precious commodity any of us has in this life, and I hate wasting it. I just hate it. So it drove me mad, and it was really not a creative critique or anything as far as the content. It was simply, there are no photos. You didn't show up, or you blew it somehow. So I have to learn how to do this myself. And then, of course, as I went through that initial process of finding my finding my mojo and figuring out the basics, and then going beyond the basics, I developed a much more critical approach to my own work. And of course, I spent a great deal of time looking at other people's photography to understand different things that I could do. Sometimes I looked at other people's photography and learned what not to do. So it was a steep learning curve in the beginning, and it was really the failure of others that motivated me to move forward.
Could you tell us more about how you developed that critical eye, as you said? Like whose photography you looked at for inspiration, and who you sought advice from?
Well, I concluded very, very early on that the secret, I'll call it the secret, it's not a secret, I tell people this all the time, young photographers and others, the key to effective photography is to see the world exactly as the camera sees it. We look at everything through a prism, the prism of our own prejudices, developed through our own experiences, our own expectations. It's human nature. So we see something in a certain way that reflects who we are, where we've come from, where we want to go. The camera doesn't have those biases. The camera sees what's in front of it. And that is really a key element to getting to the next step in your photography, is to see the world the way the camera sees it. I always give the analogy in the car world. If you have a gorgeous car, a 63 Z06 Corvette, splendid. And there it is, beautiful light. And next to the car is a beautiful young woman wearing a bikini. Behind, off in the distance, is a garbage dumpster on fire. We see this scene and we either see the girl first or the car first, or the car and the girl at the same time. We don't see that dumpster on fire until we really study the scene. The camera doesn't care. The camera considers the beautiful woman, the beautiful car, and the hideous dumpster fire. They're all equal. It sees everything. So that was a key learning moment for me.
Great. Well, can you talk a little bit more about how you got connected with General Motors and Corvette racing in particular, and how that became a big part of your professional career?
Sure. Well, I started off as a Corvette lover, so that was really the beginning of my journey that ultimately led to the relationship with GM and with the Chevrolet in particular. Growing up, I was from a time and a place, suburban New York, where cars were everything. They represented freedom and excitement, and I fell in love with Corvettes in general and mid-year Corvettes, C2 Corvettes in particular. I think just before I became a teenager, my sister bought a car magazine, and in that car magazine was a feature article about a 67 Corvette. And I took a look at the photos of that 67 Corvette, and I said, I've got to have this. I must find a way. So we were on vacation, the family was on a vacation in California when I saw that magazine article, and I determined that I would get a job as soon as I could when I got home and start saving my pennies so that I could one day buy a C2 Corvette. So ultimately, and I did, I got home, and the only job I could get at that age was a paper route, and the paper route then led to other things, shoveling snow and cutting grass, and eventually a job in a supermarket while I was, I think I just started junior high school. And so that's where the passion for Corvettes came from. And ultimately, after college and after graduate school, my wife and I decided that this was the right time in life to try to pursue our dreams rather than just chase money and chase material things. And our dream was to work with Corvettes. So we started the restoration business. That led, as I already explained, to the relationship with Vet Magazine, writing the column. Writing the column led to more articles, more writing, the photography, relationships with various different publishers. And ultimately, I sort of became a Corvette specialist in the editorial world. I was writing about other things, muscle cars, Mopar products, Mustangs, Ferraris, Porsches, but most of my writing was and still is about Corvettes. So through a very odd sequence of events, I came in contact with a marketing manager at Chevrolet, and that ultimately is what led to my involvement with Corvette racing. I can tell you that story if you wish.
Yeah, let's. Yeah, if you could talk a little bit more about that and how you came to be part of the essentially part of the team, or embedded with the team as the official photographer.
Sure. In 1990, my wife and I bought a 67 Corvette that was raced from new. It was initially owned by the Sunray DX Oil Company. It was one of 20 factory L88 Corvettes that Chevrolet built specifically for racing. And that car ended up in northern New York after Sunray DX Oil was finished racing. It was sold to a man named Bob Luby. Bob Luby sold it to a man named Dave Laughlin. They both raced it up in the Finger Lakes region. Dave Laughlin sold it in 1973 to a man named Dave Dempsey on Long Island, and that's how it came to Long Island. And when we first encountered the car, it was 1988. Its early racing history had been obscured. So the owner didn't know where it had come from. We didn't know where it had come from, but through a lot of hard work and research, we were able to go back in time and discovered that that was, in fact, the Sunray DX L88. So we bought that car, and from 90 to 92, we restored it back to its initial racing configuration. Its first race was the 12 Hours of Sebring in 1967, and it won the large displacement GT class at Sebring in 67. It won the GT class at the 24 Hours of Daytona in 68. And it's a very striking car. It's red, white, and blue, and it's a 67 Corvette Coupe, which is, of course, in my opinion, perhaps the most beautiful car ever made. So we restored that car, and because we loved the car so much, we got the idea to commission an artist to do a painting of it. And I asked around some designers with GM who I knew if they could recommend a fine artist to do a painting of the car. And I was recommended to call a man named Charles Maher, and we did. We commissioned him, and he did a painting of that Sunray DX Oil L88. When the painting was finished, Charles asked if he could display it at an AFAS show, Automotive Fine Artists Society show, in Detroit before he delivered it to us. And of course we agreed to that. The painting was displayed. That was in 1992. And a man named Gary Claudio went to that show with a couple of buddies, saw the painting of the Corvette, and wanted to buy it. He had to have it. And Gary was a passionate Corvette enthusiast and an art enthusiast. And the artist gave him the bad news: I can't sell this to you. It was a commissioned work for a couple in New York. And Gary said, well, maybe they'll sell it to me. And Charles Maher said, well, I'll pass your info along, but I doubt that they will. They own the car, the actual car that's depicted in the painting. That was 1992. A little over 3 years later, Gary was the marketing manager for Chevrolet Racing, and he was in a planning meeting discussing the livery for the factory Corvette race program that was coming, and planning the public unveil of the program. And he remembered the, he remembered the Sunray DX L88 and thought, well, it would be great if we could make these factory cars, the C5Rs that were coming, red, white, and blue like that car was. And that didn't work out because Goodwrench came on as a sponsor early on. So the C5Rs were initially the Goodwrench colors, it's silver and black scheme. But Gary also thought it would be cool to put together a display of historic Corvette race cars for the unveil of the factory program that was coming. And he thought about the Sunray DX car. He contacted the artist, Charles Maher, to get my contact information. And he called me one day. It was in early 1997. And I thought it was a prank call. The phone rang. I answered. He said, is Richard Prince there? And I said, this is he. And he said, well, Richard, I have a huge favor to ask of you. But before I ask you, I have to know if I can trust you. And I thought it was a joke. I thought it was one of my clown friends. Coincidentally, Gary is originally from Long Island, so he had the Long Island accent. I was sure it was one of my pals. I didn't get what the joke was going to be, but I knew it was a joke, and I decided, all right, I'll play along. I said, buddy, you can trust me with your life. What do you need? And he said, my name is Gary Claudio. I'm the marketing manager for Chevrolet Racing, and I want to borrow your 67 L88 for a display that we're going to put together. We have a factory Corvette road race program that's testing, and that's going to go racing in 1999, and we're going to unveil it next year at the SEMA show, and I'd like to have your car in a display. And of course, in that instant, I knew that this wasn't a prank from one of my friends, that this was for real. And I immediately said, absolutely, you can borrow the car. And then I said, I'd like to ask a favor of you, Gary. And I made clear his answer to my question had nothing to do with my willingness to loan him the car. I was going to loan the car anyway. But my request was, could I sort of embed with the team and have unlimited permission to go where they go and see what they're doing and to photograph everything that they're doing from that point forward. And my plan was to stick with the program for the remaining testing time. And then for the 3 years of racing, it was initially approved and funded for 3 years. It was a program that would begin at Daytona in January of '99, race 99, 2000, and 01, and then be finished. So I thought, well, this sounds fascinating and fun, and if I could stick with it, if I can get permission to essentially become part of this team, I'll do a book. I'll create a book when it's all over. In that point, it was a little over 4 years. And at that point, we had sold the restoration business already, and I was writing and photographing full time. So it was sort of in my wheelhouse. And without hesitating for an instant, he said, sure, absolutely, we can do that. So it was literally a 2 or 3 minute phone call that ultimately changed the entire trajectory of my life.
So we were talking earlier about how we see the world with biases and through our own perceptions, but the camera sees the world as it is, and talking about how that contributes to good photography. Can you tell us a little bit more about what makes a good photograph in your opinion and in your experience? Like what other things you look for or factors that you consider when you're trying to capture an image?
Sure. That's a very simple question with an incredibly complex answer. I would say, for me, the starting point for a good photograph is a photograph that effectively serves its purpose, that meets the need that it was intended to meet. And again, this, I'm of course speaking from my own perspective. I adore the job that I have. I absolutely love it. And the creativity, the creative process, finding something new, the art side of it is extremely important to me personally. But because this is also a business for me, it's my living, it's my livelihood, I always put the client's needs in the number one position. So there's always a client need, and to me, the best photographs are the ones that best meet the client's needs. And that, of course, can vary. In many instances, the client is a car company, and the need is to spread the word and educate consumers and encourage people to want to own the vehicle, to go out and buy the car. On the editorial side, ultimately the client is the publisher, and the need there is to sell magazines or sell books. So that's, for me, that's the starting point for a good photograph. It's a photograph that meets whatever that need is. And I think you can apply that philosophy to virtually all forms of photography. If you're a fine art photographer, who ultimately is the client, it's the audience looking at your photograph. And it's good if it stirs the audience in an emotional way, if it inspires them to do something. If you're an activist, you're in a political arena, you want to inspire people to do something or to stop doing something. If you're an environmental photographer and you're worried about the destruction of the oceans, photographs that capture the harm that we're doing to the oceans and inspire people to take action accordingly, those are good photographs. So it's across the board, I think. If the photograph serves its purpose, whatever that intended purpose is, then it's a good photograph.
Can you tell us more about how that applies to automobiles in particular, or what inspires you about automobiles? Talked a little bit before about cars representing freedom and excitement, but what can you expand on what is it about automobile photography in particular that can be impactful or even challenging?
Sure. Well, yeah, the starting point for automobiles is the emotions associated with them. Uh, and for everybody who loves cars, it's a combination of things, starting number one, of course, with freedom. Automobiles, a car represents freedom to us, to everybody. It's the freedom of movement, the freedom of expression. You can, buy the car that stirs your emotions, that makes you passionate about cars, whatever's most beautiful to you. And then, of course, people customize their cars in countless different ways, again, to fulfill their emotional needs. So it's an emotional object to start with. Physically, they can be absolutely beautiful. There's the whole technology side of it, which is important to a lot of people, including me. I love technology. I look at a car and of course, the first thing you see is the shape, the size, the contour, the textures, the colors, all the surface treatments, etc. But then you look a little deeper and you see the engineering that's behind the creation of that car, the technology, the manufacturing processes, the materials that go into it, and all of these things create sort of a massive array of emotions that stir us. So a big part of car photography is to capture that and maybe reinforce people's emotions, the emotions they already feel, the reaction they would automatically have already. And a big part of it is also helping people, in some instances, to see the car differently, to stir them in a different way, to move them in a different way. So that's a big part of car photography for me, as far as the purpose and what you can do with it. It's helping people to feel a stronger connection, or to build a connection with the car.
Can you talk more about the equipment that you use in order to get that kind of emotional response? Like maybe what different types of cameras or equipment impacts different styles of photography?
Yeah, sure. I do use a variety of different equipment. Most of my photography is done with now it's a 35 millimeter system, and now it's mirrorless. I switched to mirrorless a few years ago, but it's essentially the same as it was before mirrorless and even before digital. Interchangeable lens, 35 millimeter system, and the quality, of course, now especially, is superb, and the choice of lenses and the speed of the cameras in particular is extraordinarily helpful for a lot of the photography that I do. I do a lot of racing photography, and the ability of the cameras to focus super quickly and to do very rapid exposures is a perfect fit for that kind of photography. I also I have a Hasselblad dedicated digital medium format system, and the image quality from that system is noticeably superior to the image quality from the 35 millimeter system, but it's very slow compared to the 35 millimeter. It's larger, heavier, and slow. So it's really not well suited to a fast-paced environment like racing photography, but studio photography or environmental photography, where there's a lot more time to work around the limitations of the camera. That's a good choice there. And in in both circumstances, there are countless choices to make in terms of auxiliary lighting, lenses, filters, camera settings, and all of those things factor in to the end result. So again, getting back to what's a good photograph, it's a photograph that really effectively meets the need that you're seeking, the purpose that you're trying to accomplish, and all of the variables like lens choice, shutters, apertures, ISO, filters, in terms of equipment, lighting certainly, will all play into creating or enhancing the photograph, making better photographs that better meet the needs that you're chasing after.
Do you have a favorite type of camera, or does that vary depending on what type of situation or environment that you're in?
Well, I'm really not I'm not an equipment junkie. I know a lot of photographers who are. They cherish the equipment for its own sake, and I understand that. You see it in the car world too. You have people who do their own work, whether professionally or as a hobby, and they cherish their tools. And I appreciate that, and I cherish my tools. The feel of a beautifully crafted wrench or pair of pliers in your hand is really a joy. It's something that really adds to your enjoyment of working on the cars, and it's the same thing for photography. But getting back to, I always put the client's needs first. The number one most important thing is exceeding the client's needs at every opportunity. So from that starting point, I view the equipment as a tool. It's a tool to get the job done. Having said that, of course, I appreciate a beautifully engineered lens or camera body, and the more capable they are, the more they're able to help me achieve my goals. So I've used Canon equipment primarily since, oh boy, about 25 years ago. Prior to that, I used Nikon, and they both, as well as the other manufacturers like Fujifilm and Sony, they make super, super capable equipment, incredibly durable equipment. A lot of it, for me, comes down to just being comfortable with the equipment, the feel of the body in my hand, and a lot of that is just out of habit, developing the habit of using the equipment. So I remain loyal to Canon because I'm so familiar with it. I don't need to think about changing settings on the fly. And of course, a high-end digital camera today is a super complex piece of equipment with a lot of controls, a lot of buttons, a lot of switches, and after shooting literally millions of frames with the same system, it's all just second nature. So it's not that, oh, Canon is the best and the others are no good. They're all excellent. I'm just so used to Canon at this point that it's my preferred choice. I stick with it.
We were talking a little bit before about all the different factors or things that a photographer can manipulate in their environment. Can you tell us a little bit more about what you typically have within your control as a photographer, and how much ability you do have to manipulate what's around you?
That varies greatly according to the circumstances, according to what I'm photographing. If it's an editorial shoot or a new car photo shoot, which is typically for a car company, sometimes for other corporate clients, a great deal is within my control. Sometimes everything is within my control. It really just depends on the specific shoot. So the environment, the setting, the location, the color of the car, the time of day, lighting equipment, etc., all of that can be within my control. At the other end of the spectrum is the racing photography, where very little is within my control. The cars are what they are, and they're out on the track that they're out on. It's not the track that I've chosen. It's not the time of day that I've chosen. It's not the weather I've chosen, etc. And then as well with racing photography, there are, of course, rules governing where the photographers are allowed to go, where they're not allowed to go. So at any given track, our working space is governed by the rules. We're allowed to be here, 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 here. We're not allowed to be there, 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 there. So one of the great challenges of the motorsport photography is capturing the most compelling, the most effective images within all the constraints that we're compelled to work with. So it's quite interesting to go from one extreme to the other, where on the one hand, everything or almost everything is within my control. On the other hand, almost nothing is within my control. And I know photographers who only want to work in one or the other of those environments. Some photographers are too frustrated when they can control so little. They only want to work in a studio or do environmental photography where they're in full control of everything. And I know other photographers that don't want to be in control. Of course, there's perils on both sides. If you're in full control of everything and you fail, well, it's because you failed. You made poor choices. On the other hand, if you're working on a racetrack and the sessions are short and the car you're responsible to photograph had some problems and was only out for a few laps, and it's a cloudy, gray, dismal day, you can only do the best you can do. And it's not your fault if you have dull, dismal photos, and not very many of them, because the car wasn't out there and because the light was nasty. Some people will gravitate one way or the other. I love doing both. I love the challenge of going out to a race event and having so little within my control. It makes everything that is within my control, all of the few things that I can control, that much more important. And it's that much more challenging to get compelling photographs when you're at the mercy of the weather, you're at the mercy of the rules of the track, and so on and so forth. And then at the other extreme, I love that as well. It's a great feeling to have all these choices and to be able to think deeply about making the right choices, hopefully, and choosing the right environment and the right equipment and the right spatial relationship with the car, the angle of view, the perspective, etc., the lens choice, all of that comes into play, and it's an opportunity to really get it done.
So that's a great description about what the environment is like at the racetrack. Knowing that there is so much out of your control there, can you talk more about what kinds of choices you're making or what you're thinking about as you're trying to capture images of these cars moving at high speeds?
Yeah, sure. Obviously, light is a critical factor when it comes to photography. So you look at the race schedule, and the cars that I'm responsible for will be on track in these windows, and that provides opportunity. And then for each track, the question then is, okay, where's the smart place to be for that morning session, that afternoon session? Where are the opportunities at night? So within the constraints, the limitations, there are still choices to be made in terms of where's the best light at any given amount of time. There's the question of the types of photographs you're trying to capture. I'm always looking for images of the cars that I'm responsible for ahead of the competition. To me, that tells the story that you're trying to tell. It's the whole story. So with Corvette, for example, Corvette over the years has raced against all different kinds of cars. Some of them are long gone, the Dodge Vipers, the Ford GTs. Today, Corvette races against some of the best engineered and most expensive cars in the world: Ferraris, Porsches, Aston Martins, etc. And so I'm always seeking to capture images of my Corvettes ahead of the Ferraris and the Porsches and the McLarens and Lamborghinis. And that also informs me where I should be. There are certain areas of tracks where you have opportunities to have cars stacked up, grouped together. And so that's just another example of something to seek. Where's the light good? Where am I going to have opportunities to get my cars ahead of other cars, ahead of the competition? Shapes and colors have a lot to do with the interest of the photography, the emotions that it can evoke, and that's another couple of elements that are within my control to some extent. Certain tracks have present opportunities where you can capture beautiful S curves in the roadway, or a beautiful sweeping curve of the curbing. The curbing colors vary. Some tracks it's yellow, some it's blue, blue and white, yellow and red, green and white. And you can harness the power that these colors have in conjunction with shapes, with sweeping shapes or undulating shapes, to create far more interesting photographs. So it's just more examples of some things that can be controlled to some extent, can be harnessed. Light, location, shapes, colors, opportunities where cars tend to cluster together. Another element that can add a great deal of interest is giving the viewer of the photograph a perspective that they don't normally have. So we're human beings, we're all within a certain height range, and we tend to stay planted. And when we stand and look at a car, we're seeing it from your typical eye level, somewhere between, say, 5 feet and 6.5 feet. So if you can get super down low or up high, give a bird's eye view of the car, or give a road level view of the car, it can create a far more interesting photograph. And that's another thing that certain tracks have to offer. There's the opportunity to get up high one way or another. Like at the Long Beach races, there are parking garages we can go up on. At Michelin Raceway Road, Atlanta, there's a rooftop we can go up on. So understanding where these opportunities are and then taking advantage of them. Daytona, we can go up on the grandstands. And at certain tracks, we can get down to road level one way or another. Either there's an opportunity to do that, to actually be down on the ground safely, or there are undulations in the track that allow us to stand in a certain place and be at road level to where the car is, cresting a hill or something like that. It's one more thing that's within our control, that angle of view of the car, that is something we can use to harness to make more interesting photos. In the same vein, another element is using environmental factors to frame the car or to help emphasize the car. A classic example that all the photographers do is the through the trees photographs. There are opportunities at certain tracks, like Road America, for example. There's one turn where there are steps that lead down to the trackside, so we can stand up on the steps at different levels and find openings in the trees that are there to capture the cars coming around. So it's sort of like a voyeuristic view almost of the car, and that's quite interesting. It can make for some beautiful photographs. There are tracks where there are man-made objects, buildings, or a Barber Motorsport Park. There are sculptures, these giant insects and other really cool sculptures that you can incorporate into the photograph to just add interest in one way or another. I found a spot at the track in Bahrain last year, for example, at the WEC race, where there's a glass-faced building, and if you stand in the right spot, you can capture the track to the left, this glass-faced building to the right, with the reflection of the cars in the glass. So it's a kind of a photograph that, if you execute it well, it makes the viewer stop and think and say, I see what happened there. That's the reflection, and that's the car, and it's cool. And anytime I can make the viewer stop and really look deeper into the photo and engage with it to understand something that isn't intuitive, that isn't obvious at first glance, to me that is a good photo. It makes the viewer think and engage and say, I get it, that's cool.
Can you tell us more about the types of preparation you do before you go to the racetrack? Like these, you're talking about the different places around various tracks to take unique or interesting photos. Is that something that you planned or studied for, or is it something that you kind of discovered or comes with experience?
It definitely comes with experience. When I started photographing the Corvette race program is when I started photographing racing. So my journey with professional level racing began in January of 1999 at Daytona, and I had no understanding whatsoever of where to be when. So in the early years, each track was new to me. I'd never been to Mosport. I'd never been to Daytona. I'd never been to Road America or Laguna Seca or any of these tracks. But of course, over time, I learned each track, and again, at any track, there are places we're allowed to be and there are places we're not allowed to be. So there is a finite amount of available real estate, a finite number of places we're allowed to go. And over time, it's pretty easy to learn where to be and to learn all the places we can be and to understand the opportunities. I still occasionally go to circuits I've never been to. Last year I went to, for example, the F1 track in Brazil where WEC was racing. I'd never been there before. And while it is certainly possible to study ahead of time, especially now because we have the internet to help us, and that wasn't the case when I started, obviously. Now you can do a lot of studying before you get to a specific track. Look at other people's photos and look at satellite views of the track. I'm at a point where I'm super comfortable, and I don't feel a need to make a deep dive before I get someplace I've never been before. So I'll get there, and then we have the opportunity to walk the track every race. They have at least one, sometimes two track walks, so it's possible to just walk around the track, on the track. Also, I will typically, if it's a track I've not been to before, we'll walk the trackside, all the access points. And at most tracks, that's pretty straightforward. In some places, that's a challenge in and of itself because there is no simple access road that follows the track all the way around. The circuit in Imola in Italy is an example of that. It's an old circuit that's actually within a town. So there are a lot of dead ends. You can walk 5 or 10 or 15 minutes, and then you're at a dead end. You have to go back where you came from. So it takes a little bit more to figure those out. But it's not rocket engineering. It's understanding the whole process, and then within the context of having a deep understanding of the whole process of racing photography, just getting getting a feel for the lay of the land.
Do you have a favorite racetrack or favorite venue where uh, you really enjoyed shooting photography, or where you feel like a lot of your like really best work has happened?
Well, it's like, yeah, asking to pick a favorite child or a favorite car. Um, if I had to cite, I would say in America, overall, Sebring is my favorite race, and that's for a variety of reasons. It's certainly not the prettiest track, but I deeply appreciate the history of sports car racing, and that track represents the birthplace of endurance racing in America. The first race was held there in 1952, and the track has changed considerably over time, but the essence, its inherent personality, its core essence has not changed. So if you took somebody who was there in the 1950s and brought them through time and dropped them in Sebring in March of this year, they would immediately know where they are. They're at that track. It's been modernized, updated in some ways, but it's still Sebring. It still looks like Sebring, and that includes the crudeness. The track was laid out on what was a World War II Army Air Corps base, and the runways comprised most of the track, and they still do to this day. And some of those surfaces have not changed. They are literally the same surface that existed in 1941, 42, 43, the same concrete that was poured. It's a very, very rough surface in places, but that is part of the challenge and the charm and the allure of Sebring. So I love the sense of history there. It's a 12-hour race. I really love the longer races. They provide more opportunities. We get daytime racing, a sunset, nighttime racing there, and you inevitably get the best teams with the best drivers, the best cars. It draws people in from around the world. So if I had to pick one track in America, it's not the prettiest, but for a variety of reasons, I just love that race and that track. Outside of America, it's got to be Le Mans. The 24 Hours of Le Mans is the epitome of sports car racing. It's the apex of the sport, and it's the race everybody wants to participate in, everybody wants to win. And again, the sense of history, that race began in 1923, so it's been going on for over 100 years, and it also every year attracts the best. Anybody who's interested in sports car racing wants to be there, whether it's as a spectator, a crew member, an engineer, a driver, a photographer. It's a 24-hour race, which is, of course, very appealing to me because, again, you have everything. Daylight, sunrise, sunset, night racing, and the sheer variety of that track is also super appealing. It's a circuit that extends over 8 miles long, and much of it is on public roads that are obviously closed for the event, but because of that, you have villages, you have commercial establishments on the side of the track, you have dedicated portions of the track. There are a lot of opportunities to capture the crowd there, which is, to me, very appealing. It's part of servicing the client's needs. It's conveying the message that there are people interested in this. There are several 100,000 people there. So all these come together to make Sebring and Le Mans my favorites.
So a lot of your motorsports photography, it's not just cars on the track. You also do a lot of cars on pit road, back in the garage. Very very up close to where the competition is happening. Can you talk more about like maybe what kinds of special considerations you make for doing photography in the pits or the garage? just being in that environment, and even making sure you're looking out for your own safety?
Yeah, that's an important part of it, and that can be a challenge. It is a high risk sport, obviously, and there are potentially dangerous environments that we are permitted to work in, specifically pit lane. And yeah, I think it's an important part of capturing the totality of any event is helping people who are interested to get a glimpse behind the curtain, to see what is going on beyond just the cars out on track. And there's a whole lot going on, obviously. Every team has an intensely dedicated crew, and there are race engineers and powertrain engineers and this small army of people who are there to make it happen, and giving the fans a view of that behind the scenes, the people working, and the action on pit lane, the action in the garage is interesting. It's interesting to me, and it helps to engage the fans, keep them engaged, keep them interested, and it helps to build a following for a team and a program. If it's just a matter of the cars out on track, people can watch the race broadcasts and they get most of that. They're not going to get behind the scenes look, photographs and video of driver change practice, pit stop practice, taking the cars apart, fixing them after damage, changing suspension settings and so on, rebuilding the cars, doing engine changes. All these things that go on behind the scenes are super interesting, and were it not for the photographers working behind the scenes, the fans wouldn't have that view. So it's an important part of it. Yeah, pit lane is a hectic place. In the IMSA series, for years now, we're not allowed to work on pit lane during the actual race, but we are allowed on pit lane during practice and qualifying sessions. We have to be suited up with Nomex fire suit and with a helmet for our own protection, and it can be treacherous out there. So it's important to stay 100% alert and focused, which is quite challenging because we're focused on the work we're doing, but we also have to be focused on what's happening all around us. And understanding the movement of the cars and kind of the rhythm of the teams is a big part of that, of staying safe out there. And one of the things that's made that more challenging recently is the adoption of hybrid technology in the prototype cars, because it's important to rely on all of the senses while you're out there, what you can see, but also what you can hear. And before hybrid technology, before electric motors were allowing the cars to leave their pit boxes, you could understand a lot of what was happening just by what you were hearing. The cars would come in, the engines would turn off. When that engine turned back on, you know that car was going to leave very soon. Now with the prototypes, there's no engine turning on, so we need to be ever more vigilant, because a car will take off on its electric motor without any auditory warning. So it's just a matter of understanding what's going on out there and staying super focused on what's going on out there and not being in the wrong place at the wrong time.
Could you talk more about how often you move around or change locations during a long endurance race like Lamar or Daytona or even Sebring? Like, how many places are you at over that 24-hour or 12-hour period?
Yeah, I usually start off with the goal that I'm going to be here, here, here. I have this whole long list of places I want to be, and more often than not, it doesn't work out exactly as planned. Typically at an IMSA race or a WEC race now, I'm responsible for the Corvettes and for the Cadillacs. And the number can vary, but it's a fair number of cars any way you slice it. The first opening race for the 2025 season is coming up in a couple of weeks in Daytona, and there will be 3 Cadillacs and 5 Corvettes, so there's 8 cars. So through all the practice sessions, I'll go to a spot, and my goal is to capture all 8 cars there before I move on to the next spot. And that is not really a reasonable expectation, because during practice sessions, the cars are in and out a lot. They're coming in, they're making adjustments to the chassis. Sometimes it's a minute or two, sometimes it's 10 or 15 minutes. So this is something that requires constant adjustment and constant thought for me, to keep moving so that I have a really wide variety, but also devote enough time to each spot so that I've captured as much as I can capture there. And a big part of that, of being as efficient and productive as possible, is having the ability to move quickly. So at almost all the races, I have motorized transport. I typically have a scooter. In the IMSA series, the Wheel and Engineering Action Express Cadillac team is kind enough to carry my scooter on their transport truck. And the couple of races that they don't go to, where the prototypes don't compete, like VIR and Canadian Tire Motorsport Park, I will bring a scooter myself. I have a scooter that just barely fits in the back of my minivan. And the scooter is a very efficient way to get from point to point. There are some places where I don't have a scooter. I'll rent a golf cart for those typically. And then there are some tracks where it's just not feasible to use motorized transport, like the Long Beach Grand Prix. It's a street circuit, and the scooter or golf cart is really of no help there. So then it's a matter of hustling. There's a lot of running going on. And at Long Beach, there's a lot of bridge crossing. There are, because it's a street circuit, there are bridges that up and down, up and down. It's a challenge. There's usually a big crowd there. It's usually hot there, and I'm carrying a lot of equipment running up and down those bridges. And that's a short race as well, which makes it even more challenging. But there are other races where, I mentioned Imola, which has a lot of dead ends and a lot of tricky ways to move around, not intuitive ways. You have to sort of know your way around that track. And the scooter there is really of not much help, so it's a matter of hustling.
So we talked before about how you're still very much an active photographer. This is still something that you're doing, have a whole season planned for 2025. Are there races or venues or places that you'd like to go do photography that you haven't been to yet at this point in your career?
Yes. Years ago, I used to say, I'm not that interested to do a full season, but I'd like to do certain select NASCAR races, the Daytona 500, the big races, the Indy 500, the Monaco Grand Prix. And over time, I ended up doing most of those. And I look at it a little differently now at this point, after so many years. This will be my 29th year, consecutive year, photographing motorsport. There's certain things I haven't done that I would still like to do. The Pikes Peak hill climb, for example. I've never shot Pikes Peak. It is stunning, it's beautiful. If the opportunity is there, I will certainly take it. If I never do it, I'm at peace with that as well. As far as sports car racing, at this point, there isn't a sports car race or a racing venue that I absolutely have to do. There are some that I would like to do. The Nürburgring 24-hour, for example, is one that I've not done, that I would welcome the opportunity to do it, but if that opportunity doesn't come, I'm still a happy person, still content.
Is there anything else that really stands out about your photography career, or the way that you pursue photography, or what it's like to be at the racetrack, or anything else that we haven't talked about that you think might be a good fit for this exhibit?
Oh boy. Well, I'll say something about my colleagues. Photography is an odd profession in a number of ways. One of them is it's often a lonely profession. With the racing, it's a little bit different because we're brought together 8 or 10 or 15, or with some of my colleagues 25 times a year for weekends. So we end up spending a lot of time together. On the editorial side, it's a solo pursuit. So there are other car photographers, I know their names, for 20 and 30 years. I've never actually met them. They're off somewhere, I'm off somewhere. But in racing, it's a little bit different. And it's been extremely gratifying, satisfying to make this network of friends over time. And there's a core group, people that I've worked alongside, some of them my entire career because they were there before I got there, and there's still a handful that are still active. Others, it's been 6, 7 years, 10 years, 20 years, and helping each other, spending time together with each other has made it a way more interesting way to make a living. So that's an important element. I think it's natural, particularly for creatives and particularly in a competitive work environment, which racing photography is. There's a finite amount of work, and there are a lot more people who want to do it than have the opportunity to do it. So when you're in that environment where it's highly competitive, and also the creative side of it can tend to drive people to withdraw, to avoid interaction with others. And while that might be the natural first instinct, I have found it super helpful and super enjoyable to go the other direction, to engage with the others. And at the end of the day, be there to help each other and to support each other, and also to just enjoy each other's company. So the people side of it is a huge part of my enjoyment and why I want to keep going. I'll also say this is a question that comes up a lot. After so many years, I see the waves of new people who come in and they think they want to do this for a living, and some of them find out they don't because it's difficult in so many ways. Some of them just can't do it, but for one reason or another, the question comes up a lot: what's the secret to success here? What do I need to do this, to make this my job? And it's really not rocket engineering. I said earlier, it's an odd profession in many ways. One of the ways that it is different from a lot of other pursuits is experience counts, but it doesn't count for that much in some cases. You can have somebody come in with no education, no formal training in photography, and little to no experience. But if they get it, and they learn quickly, and they have an intuitive sense, and they're super creative, they have that magic eye, they can be great very quickly. And you have other people who've been doing it for years, many years in some cases, and they just don't have that creative sense, and they just can't get past mediocre. So the secret is not necessarily go through a 4-year program or get a college degree or a 2-year program, get your degree and go to this seminar and that seminar. The secret, such that it is pretty basic. Number one, you have to be willing to work hard. It's not easy. It doesn't matter if it's cold out there. Saturday night in Daytona, we freeze every year. Yeah, it's Florida. It's freezing. The sun comes up on Sunday and it's hot. Certain races, June, July, August, it's miserably hot. We're wearing a Nomex fire suit and it's 95, 93, 98 degrees Fahrenheit. It's cold, it's hot, it's raining. There's no such thing as it's raining, I'm not going out there. The race goes on, hot, cold, day, night, rain, it doesn't matter. So you've got to have the physical stamina and the mental stamina to work hard. It does not matter. There's no excuse. You need to be out there working hard. Number two, you need people skills. It is a people sport. It's a service business at the end of the day. And if you're surly, disagreeable, nasty, nobody wants to work with you. So you have to work hard, you have to be a decent person, and then you do have to have some level of creativity. You have to be able to produce the photos that satisfy your client's needs. So those elements, work hard, be a decent person, and produce good photography. I'll say that simple.
Is that part of what keeps you coming back and what's kept you active in this industry for almost 30 years now? Or is there one thing or a combination of things that still, gives you drive through this point of your career?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, we talked about learning tracks and then having this intuitive understanding of tracks from going there again and again and again, and about the constraints that I and the others work under, where we're only allowed to be in certain areas of the track. And so on the one hand, being super comfortable with the venue, having an innate knowledge of the venue at any of these tracks, any permanent course or any street course in North America or in Europe or in Asia or in the Middle East, where I've shot now so many times, without even thinking about it, I can, in my mind, see that entire track. I can see every photo hole, I can see every pathway, every place that we're allowed to work and what it looks like and what the camera can see. It's all second nature to me now. So it's great to be so comfortable and have such a deep understanding of the tracks. On the other hand, it can get boring after a while, doing the same thing in the same place again and again and again. Some of these tracks, between all the different race series and also media programs and production car launches and production car testing and race car testing, there are tracks that I've shot 70, 80, 100 times. So getting complacent is an issue, and the way that I deal with that, and one of the things that really keeps me interested and keeps me focused, is always trying to find something new, even at a place that I've been to 50 or 100 or 130 times. And the more times I go to a given track, the more difficult it is to find something new. But my approach is, there is something new. There's always something new there. No matter how many times I've shot a track, no matter how many hours I've spent, no matter how familiar I am with it, there is something new there. And my challenge, and this is how I challenge myself, my challenge is to find that thing, whatever that thing is that's new. It's there, I have to find it, and it keeps me sort of hungry, it keeps me interested and focused. And every year, several times a year, I find it. I find something 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 times a year. And it's just so intensely satisfying when that happens.
Can you give an example of maybe some of those instances where you went to a track that you'd been to multiple times before but had that discovery moment of finding something new?
Sure. One relatively recent was at Le Mans. It's a race that I've photographed 25 times. And of course, it's a 24-hour race, so there's plenty of time. And the practice and qualifying sessions, that's varied over the years, up or down a little bit, but it's many, many more hours. They do a test day there. The test day used to be in the springtime, earlier, separate from the race. In recent years, it's the weekend before the race, but that's a whole day of running. So all these many, many hours, and again, we're only allowed to go certain places. But recently I was in a location that I shot every time I was there, at an area of the track called Indianapolis. And there's a 3-level steel crash barrier, 3-level section of Armco. And of course, the instinct is always stand and shoot over the crash barrier at the cars as they come around. It's a very wooded area, and it can be a beautiful photograph, but it's sort of the same photograph again and again. And I was standing there a few years ago thinking, there's something, what can I do? There's something different. I've got to do something different. And I looked down and realized the space between the sections of steel barrier was wider than it normally is. There was an opening there. And it was late in the day, and the crash barrier extended, and then it swept to my left, and the light was coming through not only the spaces, the open spaces, but also these oval-shaped holes that were punched into the steel all the way around. And it's where the bolts go through for the steel to mount to the vertical stanchions, the I-beams that hold it up. But there are more holes than there are bolts. So I looked, and the light was creating this beautiful sort of stippled pattern as it went through the Armco on this sweep, and the opening was enough to sneak my lens in there and capture the cars coming around, looking through the Armco with this beautiful sweep off to the left and beautiful light pattern. The only real difficulty was I couldn't see what was coming. So it was a matter of trying to hear what was coming and to photograph what was suddenly in the frame for an instant and then out of the frame. And one of the beauties of Le Mans is the length of the track. So there's a lot of different photo opportunities, but one of the challenges there is the length of the track, because the cars take roughly about 4 minutes to come around. So if you're waiting for a specific car, as I was waiting for the Corvettes. If I miss that opportunity, it's another 4 minutes before they come around again. So it's a great challenge. And it just all came together in that instant, and both Corvettes came through into the frame at the same time, and I was able to capture both Corvettes, and it's a beautiful photo, really a stunning photograph that I had never done before, even though I had stood in that same place dozens of times before. So that's an example of just looking around, trying to see something differently. And I think it's part of human nature to find that comfort spot. We want organization, we crave it in our brains. So we always want to put the square peg in the square hole and the round peg in the round hole. And at any given spot, what we've seen there before, the shot or the couple or the 3 or 4 different kinds of shot, coming, going away, etc., it's comfortable to see the same thing again and again. So it's a matter of stepping outside of that, stepping outside of what we intuitively crave, that comfort zone, and trying to see it differently. And the occasions when that succeeds is super gratifying.
That's great. Joey, anything that came to mind that you were curious about?
Kind of going off that last one, is there, and this answer you just addressed it, Gable, as if you asked it, is there one photo in your career that stands out as the one that's your favorite or you're most proud of, or something like that?
Well, my favorite keeps changing.
That's my problem too.
Yeah.
I have a lot of recency bias for me.
Yeah. Like the photo I described at Lamar, that was instantly my favorite. But then something really, really beautiful came along after that, and that was my favorite. I can cite one specific photograph as the most difficult photo that I've ever created, and that is it's several different, but it's the same photo shoot. It was the most difficult photo shoot, and that was the shoot with all 8 generations of historic Corvette race cars. And that was super stressful and super challenging, beyond all reason, and it was an absolute miracle that all came together. Do you want me to tell you the backstory?
Yeah, if you could talk about
For that.
the backstory and what made it especially challenging.
Well, when the introduction of the C8 was approaching, the car was still a secret, the mid-engine production car, and of course the mid-engine race car. But the unveil was approaching, so there was a lot of discussion about what to do special for the unveil. And I proposed gathering together one example of a significant, successful, important race car from each generation of Corvette for an all 8 generation photo shoot. And the idea was embraced. Everybody loved it. The challenge was this was going to require a big budget, because it only made sense to do this on a racetrack. So we needed to rent a racetrack, and then we needed to get 8 race cars there. And so that involved transportation costs. And then I also pointed out, if we're going to borrow a super valuable historic car from a person, we have to allow them to be there with their car. So that then added travel costs to that. And I put together a budget, and it was pretty eye-opening. It was pretty sobering. And ultimately, there was no funding to do this, but I was just absolutely determined. I thought, this is an opportunity that doesn't come along very often. And I started thinking, how can I pull this off with no budget, no money? And in a way, the biggest challenge was the C8R, because at that point, there was only one in the world. It was the operational test car, and its time was accounted for. So that car wasn't just hanging around doing nothing for a moment. It was either on a racetrack testing, it was back in the shop at Pratt Miller Engineering, being torn down, analyzed, rebuilt. It was in the wind tunnel. It was at Milford. It was in the chassis dynamics lab. It was always somewhere. So that was the starting point. How can I get my hands on a C8R? And the obvious solution was, well, it's testing. So that solves 2 problems. The car will be there, and it'll be at a racetrack. So I looked at the test schedule. This was going into 2020. So it was at the end of 2019. And the car was testing at Sebring in February. and my wheels started turning. What could I do to get the other 7 cars to Sebring? And I immediately thought of my friend Bill Tower. He owns one of the SR2 cars, and he owns one of the 5 1963 Grand Sports, and he lives in Florida. And he's a super enthusiastic guy, and I knew he'd be into it. So that was a C2, a C1 and a C2. C3, my first choice for C3 would be one of the Works Greenwood wide-body cars. And I thought of Steve Golden. He's got the Spirit of 76 Greenwood car. He lives in Florida. He's in Miami. Bill Towers in the Plant City, north of Sebring, south of Sebring. So there's still challenges here getting these cars to the track. I needed a C4. I called Lance Miller, told him what I was plotting to do, and asked him if he knew of a good C4 in Florida. And of course, the thought was a challenge car, because that's where the majority of the C4s that were raced in the Challenge Series. And I wanted a good challenge car, not one that had done 1 or 2 races and faded away. Lance Miller immediately said, call my pal Dan Barr. He's got a car that did 2 full seasons. He bought it right off the track at the end of the second season, and he's super passionate Corvette enthusiast, and I'm sure he'll help you. And so I called Dan Barr, and he was all in, 100% in. I called Bill Tower, I called Steve Golden. They were all in. They were all excited about this. So now I had a C1, C2, C3, and a C4. I still needed a C5, 6, and 7. And while numerous examples of those cars are out there in the wild, because they were sold after they were replaced with either a new example of the same generation or when Chevrolet moved on to the next generation, I did not know of any C5, 6s, or 7s that were in Florida. And when it came to the C5R, there was one particular one that I really wanted to have for the photo shoot, and that's the one that GM has kept. It is the most successful chassis. It's C5R number 3, and it won everything that could be won. It was the overall winner at the 24 Hours of Daytona in 2001. It was the series championship car. It was the Le Mans winner twice. It was the Sebring winner. It is an astoundingly successful car, and it's in the GM Heritage Collection. So then it was just a matter of convincing somebody at GM to agree to provide it, and I needed to get it to Florida. And the solution to that was pretty easy, because it could go on the transport truck with the C8R. It just had to get from where it was stored to Pratt Miller. So I was able to arrange that. Same thing for the C6R. GM agreed to provide that, and we were able to get that to Florida. Just left the C7R. GM has 2 C7Rs. One was apart, disassembled, and one was all together. They agreed to provide the one that was all together, but that was a problem because it wasn't actually a C7R race car. It was the C7R show car, which had never raced and wasn't even a C7R to begin with. That car started life as a C5 engineering test car. It was a development mule that got absolutely pummeled, as early development cars do, and was slated to be crushed, destroyed. But Chevrolet needed a C5R show car. So that was a fast and inexpensive way to create one. Take this development mule production car and put the C5R bodywork on it and C5R wheels on it, and turn it into a C5R display car. When we transitioned to the C6R, that car was updated with C6R bodywork. And then when the transition to the C7R was made, that car was updated again with C7R bodywork. The problems were, again, it never raced. It also, while it looked like a C7R, it was different. It was narrower. It was about 3 inches narrower than an actual C7R race car, because as the race car progressed, it got wider. The chassis, suspension, the body, everything got wider. The C7R show car was still a C5R show car, which was still a C5 production chassis, so it was too narrow. And I got a little bit of pushback on that. Oh, it looks like a C7R, nobody will know the difference. And I said, well, first of all, I'll know the difference, and I'll be forever haunted if we have 7 real race cars, 7 great race cars, and one that's not a race car at all. But there'll be others who know also. The sharper fans, the more emotionally invested fans, they will look at that and they will say, it's too narrow, it's not a C7R. So it became a huge challenge then to come up with a C7R. And again, GM has one, but it happened to be disassembled. And this was at a super busy time, and there wasn't time to put it back together. It was just too far apart. So one of the mechanics at Pratt Miller said, well, there's another C7R here. It's privately owned. It's also a part. It's here for some work, but it's a lot closer to being back together. And maybe if the owner gives permission and if we can find the time to put that back together. And that car was owned by Pierce Marshall, who you know well because he's a great friend to this museum and a great patron of the sport and a massive Corvette enthusiast. So I called Pierce, told him what I was doing, and he was 100% on board. Yes, you can have my car. Then a couple of the mechanics at Pratt Miller, on their own time, stayed late every night for a week to put that car back together. So that car got back together, got brought to Sebring, and the final few challenges were the C8R was there to test. And again, every minute was accounted for. So I had a very, very small window of time with that car at sunrise one morning, and there was no second chance because the team had to test, and also because they were sharing the track with another team, a prototype team. And once the track went hot, there was no, oh, can I have a half hour or 20 minutes of time? The other team also was there to test and had to do what they had to do. So we had one window of time. The weather had to cooperate. The cars all had to get there. The Greenwood wide-body car was at an event up north. It was in transit and had to get there. Bill Tower's cars had to get there. He brought them both himself in single-car trailers. He had to have a buddy help him. And the cars from Michigan, the C7R, had to be put back together. So all these things had to come together all at once, and miraculously they did. That was in February of 2020, and it was just a week or two later that the COVID pandemic hit and the whole world shut down. So it was just that key little moment in time where everything came together for that intensely challenging photo shoot. I can also, if you want, I'm not talking too much, talk about the special team photos at Le Mans that we've done for the last 7 or 8, 9 years that are also super, super difficult.
Because you've mentioned that those can be a challenge to coordinate and get everybody together. So yeah, if you could talk more about those too. About all the things that go on behind the scenes with those photos, that'd be great.
Yes, sure. Yeah, as we've discussed already, Le Mans is the single most important race of the year. It's the biggest sports car race in the world, and the most prestigious and the most important to General Motors. And so going there, it's not just another race. It is an epic happening, and I've always done team photos there, in part because it's so special for the team, everybody on that team. If you work in the business of racing and you work in sports car racing, you want to go to Le Mans. Everybody wants to compete there. So doing a full team photo is important. It helps create the memory for everybody on the team, but it's also important for the fans, and it's important for General Motors, and it's important for the whole program. In the early years, we would put the cars on the start-finish line or somewhere on the front straight. Even though the track is long, it's a huge venue, there's still limited opportunity because we're doing the team photo early in the week, and most of the track is on public roads. So the roads are open, we can't go out there. We only have basically from the entrance to the front straight up to the entrance to Tetra Rouge. And one whole area of the track that's among the most iconic, which is the area that includes the Dunlop Bridge, was of not much use to us because the Corvettes were not on Dunlop tires, so there was a conflict in branding there. In the very beginning, Corvettes raced on Goodyear, and then for many, many years since and up until the present, they're on Michelin tires. So that we were very limited in where we could be. So one year to the next, the team photos sort of look alike. And that got me thinking about, within this constrained area, what can we do that's a little bit different? And there's an area of the track created where the track splits. Go to the right and you're on the entrance to pit lane, go to the left and you're approaching the front straight. So where the track splits, in between there is a big area of tarmac that's a sort of dead space, and it has painted on it Le Mans in giant letters. And I thought, wow, it would be great if we could capture that, because it's beautiful. It'll be an up-high view. It'll provide a different view of the cars. It'll leave no doubt where we are, and it'll be cool. But how do I get up high? You have to get up high there. A ladder's not going to do it. So I went to my friends at George P. Johnson, which is the company that handles all the logistics and the infrastructure for GM, and explained what I wanted to do, get up high, how can we do this? And the only machinery that they had at that time was basically a forklift. So they have technicians, they made a wooden box that mounted on the front of the forklift, and I was in the wooden box. And of course the forklift was able to get me up much higher than a ladder, but not super high. And the first a few years, we did team photos there and just arranged the cars and the team, and it was quite beautiful. But it, again, started to look the same one year to the next, and I started thinking about what can we do that's different here, and got the idea to do what I call themed photos, using the cars and the people to create a message, a symbol or word or number, and that's what gave rise to the team photos that we've done at Le Mans the last, not sure if 7, 8, 9, 10 years, something like that. And those are the most difficult photos that I do each year. The first challenge is coming up with an idea for next year. And in my mind, the basis of the idea is to say thank you to something, somebody, or to honor something or somebody. And that's what's kind of driven the ideas and created the concept. And then the concept, of course, is the starting point. Executing it is super difficult in some cases. And I've had tremendous help in that regard. I must thank the team, first of all, the Corvette racing team. There have been some individuals that have just gone out of their way. They wanted to be part of the process, like my friend David James, for example, who's always been there. to help, and the team, for the entire team, for their patience and their understanding and their trust, because they're down on the ground and they're being told, stand here, stand there, move a little to the right. Brian Hoy, take a half a step to the left. Kyle Millay, blah, 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 blah. And from the ground, they don't know what's happening. They don't see what I see when I'm up high. So the trust and the time, and some years it's taken quite a lot of time. We got quite good at it, so it was quite quick after a while, but then there have been glitches along the way. One year, some of the team members and the staff, Reinert and the others from George P. Johnson, have always been super helpful. We start with a drawing, or sometimes I do a mock-up photograph, and then from that we lay out a grid on the ground and mark where everything goes, where everybody goes. One year we did that in chalk. It was a sunny, lovely day. We marked the ground in the morning, and we got an unexpected rainstorm in the afternoon, and all the chalk was gone. So that took a little bit extra time that year to start from scratch again. Some of them were so complicated and difficult, I was really concerned about failure. And on those occasions, I always started with a real quick, just simple team photo in case the concept photo fails, but miraculously, again, with incredible, intense help from a lot of people, we've managed to get those done every year, and fans wait for them every year. They're super, super popular, and they're really compelling. One year we did, as an example, use the cars and the people to create the Chevrolet bow tie. And that was my way of thanking Chevrolet, and by that I mean the people at Chevrolet, because there's 40 or 50 people at the race in Le Mans, all the mechanics, the technicians, the engineers, team managers, the drivers, the tire specialists, the Bosch engineer, etc. That's a few dozen people. There are literally thousands and thousands of people back in Michigan and right here where we are in Bowling Green, Kentucky, who contribute to that. Every single one of them makes their contribution, and without all of those contributions, we wouldn't be in Le Mans. So it was a thank you to the men and women of Chevrolet in Michigan and in Bowling Green, Kentucky, who worked so hard to make the Corvette the best production sports car in the world. One year we did a giant 24, so when you look at it, it says Le Mans 24, and that was a thank you to the, again, thousands of people who make that race happen. And there are certain names, the president of the FIA and the ACO, the organizations that orchestrate that race, whose names are well known in the racing world. But there are thousands of people, from tech inspectors, all the many corner workers, the organizational people, the marketing people, the media people, the hospitality people, all these people connected to the race, without which it couldn't happen, who are unfortunately nameless, faceless people, but that was our way as a team to say thank you to the entire organization that makes this happen. And one year this was one of the really difficult ones. We used the cars and the people to form the Jake Skull, the Corvette racing mascot. And that was a thank you to the fans who have embraced Jake, and Jake has come to represent Corvette racing and kind of the edgy attitude of this sort of brash American racing team that put itself on the world stage in 2000, raced at Le Mans as a full factory effort for the first time ever. And it was a time when Corvette was not taken that seriously in Europe and a lot of other parts of the world for a variety of reasons. And had a good showing in 2000 and had a breakout year in 2001 and won the 24 Hours of Le Mans. And even then, a lot of people said, well, you know, you get lucky and all the pieces come together and and you can win this race. But Corvette was not there to win one race. As it turns out, we didn't know this at the time, because at that time it had been renewed for the next year, and it was being renewed 1 year at a time. But just a few short years after that, Corvette won 3 times in a row at the 24 Hours of Le Mans. And again, this is a race that brings together the best teams, the best cars, the best drivers in the world. And it's extraordinarily difficult to win there. It's, you want to say, almost impossible to win 2 in a row, 3 in a row. And by the end of that third victory, it was clear to everybody that this was not a matter of luck, that this was a racing dynasty in the making. This was a force to be reckoned with, and Corvette established itself as the best production sports car racing program in the world. And a huge part of that success and the longevity of the program, the endurance of the program, has been the fan base. The fans are there en masse to support Corvette. And of course, a big part of that enthusiasm and that passion for the car is buying Corvettes, owning Corvettes, nurturing them, loving them, and other GM products. The Corvette Nation buys Chevy pickup trucks, GMC pickup trucks, Cadillac Escalades, Cadillac Blackwings, Cadillac V-Series cars, Malibus when they were producing Malibus, SUVs, etc. They are intensely devoted and loyal customers, and they are intensely passionate fans, the most passionate fans in the world. So that year when we did the Jake Skull, it was a way to say thank you to the many, many, many Corvette racing fans around the world who really formed the foundation upon which that program was built and upon which the program endures to this day.
That's great.
Cool.
I think we're good.
I think we got a lot. I think we're good.
Well, that's great,
Yeah.
Richard. Thank you very
Yeah.
much. That's a
You're welcome. I'm sorry I had a little scratch in my throat there at the beginning. There was a little bit of
Fix it in
coughing.
post. You know how the game goes.
Will you put some hair on my head and make me taller?
Yeah, I think an afro probably. We good?
Yeah, I started with an afro.
Oh, really?
Actually,
Nice.
yep. Early in this life. Yep.
Isn't that cool?
I don't think there's
Turn this heater back on, 'cause this is going a little bit chilly in here. There you go. Well, that's great.